Hi there, this is Jenny Clark with Solvability. We've got another session today of Freedom Friday. We do this every Friday. Started it during COVID as a way to keep our GovCon community connected. And it looks like we're going to keep doing it for a while. So today's guest is Michael Rauseo, who came to GovCon Summit and has supported us a couple times in the past. I reached out to him and I said, Michael, how are people keeping up relationships during these times of COVID? Because as I just mentioned, I was trying to do online dating, and you really can't do that because you're never going to meet these people. And it's just too much effort to try to create an online relationship with a complete stranger you know that nothing about. So Michael, let's let you talk a little bit, introduce yourself, what you're doing at Red Horse, and then talk for a bit about what your guidance is for small businesses that want to grow like Red Horse. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. Really appreciate the introduction and appreciate being here and getting the time to speak. I'm happy to be interrupted and by you or anybody else, whether it's you, your alter ego Oprah, or any of the other guests. I'm happy to field questions. I spent a few minutes thinking about the question that you asked and for me to talk about. And I've got really three main areas that I'll talk about, and I'll get to that in just a couple minutes. As by way of introduction, I saw a lot of folks on LinkedIn, on the LinkedIn announcement, had looked at my profile, and they probably have a little bit of an idea of my biography. But I came to Red Horse a little over 7 years ago, and have enjoyed. It started with client delivery, working directly in support of a client within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and have since, after a couple of years of that, about 2015, I came up to the corporate headquarters to help my boss build the portfolio within the OSD. And at this point, I'm ultimately responsible for our OSD portfolio for the company from a pipeline building and capture perspective. And then I also oversee and really support in a mentorship way the program managers who are helping execute the contracts that we do win within the space. And I say that because I've sort of learned as like an on-the-job learner. I am not an MBA. I am not a sales guy by trade, and I'm not a BD guy. I kind of sort of fell into it just by really exercising skills that I learned as a human officer in the military, which is all about just establishing and maintaining relationships and just being a good professional. Having spent some time with as an intel officer within the military and as well as a consultant, I've always been sort of in a support role and have always been successful in just making myself or folks that work with me or for me sort of indispensable to the folks that we support, whether if it's an infantry unit, whether it's a customer, or whether it's in your personal life, you're volunteering, you're there to help. And so that's sort of the mantra that I take and that I think has been very successful, because you don't have to really abide by all of these, whiz-bang sayings like, under promise and over deliver, and you got to meet a quota and you've got to do this. The pressure comes off in that way. I was sort of trained that, everybody's inherent mission statement should be do meaningful work, have fun, and make money. And it's in that order, because if you do it in that order, you're gonna have fun if you're doing meaningful work because it means something to you, and then the money will come. You shouldn't be doing it the opposite way, because if you do, you sort of end up upside down, as the process implies. And that's not.
Michael, what you're saying is you can actually be a human being in doing what you're doing and use all the skills you bring from your life experience. And how does being a human intelligence officer apply in what you're doing? I think that's fascinating, because you must be able to really get inside their heads.
It's and I appreciate the question, because it's a great segue into the first point. And I'll break that first point up into pre and post COVID and then COVID, because really it's all about just having bedside manner and being sincere and convincing. And sincere and convincing, again, isn't selling something and then delivering something totally opposite, or selling something and handing it off to people who completely botch up the delivery, right? Whether it's professional services or software development or whatever it is you're doing. You need to have good bedside manner in the sense that you're listening, you're not trying to sell, you're really along for the journey with the client. And it's the same thing sort of in the human intelligence realm. Well, whether you're in an interrogation booth with somebody, or whether you're an FBI agent running an informant network, it's a little bit, it's obviously very much a different context, but you're establishing a relationship not to best somebody or to be on top of somebody. You're in a relationship with somebody to get somewhere. And it's more of a shoulder to shoulder relationship, and not I'm sitting higher than you, or you work for me, or I own you, or something like that, or I'm a cop, you're a prisoner, or something like that. If you think of it that way, then you're on a different playing field, and you're going to remain on that different playing field. And at the end of the day, I mean, the enemy has a vote, the customer has a vote, and the customer's always right. So if you're not on that same playing field with them, if you're not shoulder to shoulder with them, then at any point, at any day, no matter how well you're doing, that rug can come out from under you. And so when it does, because it inevitably will, it will soften the fall. You can get yourself back up and dust off, and you can rely on those relationships because they're true, they're meaningful, and you can really just kind of start over without really worrying about like what went wrong that you can control. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing it right, most things that go wrong are out of your control, and you can continue on as is and not really have to pivot or change the way you're doing business too much. You can kind of continue forward with the same set of core values that you found your company with. And those core values should theoretically stay the same, and your business process should well, not business processes, because those change as you scale, but the way that you are known to a customer should be no different when you're 10 employees than when you're 100 employees. And that's the other thing that we do really well at my company, is that we maintain and we bring people up into the lower management levels who we trust to maintain that level of intimacy with our customers that we had when we were a smaller company. We're now at about 400, and I started management when we were about like 40 within the practice, and now we have about 150 in the practice. So we're a totally different looking company, but we still keep that same exact mentality and sort of bedside manner throughout the whole process. And
well,
then,
Michael, what you're talking about is really having your whole corporate culture, your approach, and everything else embedded in your entire style. And a lot of that has to do with who you bring on as a team.
mm-hmm.
But going from 40 employees to 400, wow, what were the biggest changes you saw from that?
It's you have to bring on different systems and business processes, as I alluded to. And that's going to change the way you do business. But if you sort of lead from the top and you bring those, instantiate those with sort of high level direction, you really much can get everybody on board. But the biggest thing that you have to fight against is the dilution of the product or of the services that you provide. And then that is ensuring that you really have, you're putting the right people into jobs. And the way that we've done it is that for larger contracts, we'll usually appoint or anoint like a site lead who's like a quasi junior PM who we trust to make sure that they can be the first point of contact for that customer. Because if they have a question or if they think something's going awry, they can touch that person right away. And then that person may not have signature authority within the company, but can at least raise it to the PM who does have signature authority. And then that PM can corral the other cats and dogs that are like maybe like a 1 or a 2 person contract, but then also know the belly button of a much larger contract. Like our litmus test is usually about 10 or more. If it's 10 or more people, we usually have a site lead who, collects all the MSR input, manages the travel funds, ensures that they're talking to the customer, because that core is usually working with multiple technical leads. And once you start to spiderweb that out, it can get out of control quickly. Well, if you get a site lead and a core who are in lockstep, you've got the vendor side covered, you have the customer side covered from a contractual standpoint, and then no matter where anything goes, it's going to usually spread out from one of those two. But you've got somebody on the inside right away, and so you can usually squash something before it gets out of control.
Wow, I think what we're talking about is what I've always heard is described almost like a chief of staff position. Mm-hmm. That there's a different level of communication, and the chief of staff is to execute the program and make sure everything happens. But you're right. If you've got 10 technical people and nobody dealing with the paperwork, things will get stuck and make you look really bad. Was it an experience that made you guys go that direction, or has it always grown up that way?
Well, I think it's our owners. When they started the company, they had always said that you're kind of only as good as your last CPARs. And if you're a 100-person company and you're going for a piece of work and you got to rely on something that happened when you were a 40-person company and you have a poor CPARs because of that, like your pipeline's going to get torpedoed if that's the case. And so one of the main goals is to ensure that you're delivering to a point where you can always reach back and touch a customer or a client and ask them to do something for you to support a bid. And it should always be yes. Like you should never have to worry about that as a go, no-go criteria in trying to go after a piece of work, right?
Oh my gosh. I think that's so important, because as these small businesses are starting out, there's so much to know, and they haven't even learned what CPARS stands for necessarily. Okay. But we had at GovCon Summit, Garth Arevalo of Lucas did an entire section on CPARS. And what he was trying to do is prepare people for what they needed to know. I don't even know what CPAR stands for. So could you just tell me that first?
It's the Contractor Performance Assessment Rating System. And so you have a contract with the government. They can't reward you. They can't give you accolades technically. What it means is that they have to do everything via the CPARs, because that's the official program of record for them to evaluate your performance. And that's what you use to sell yourself in like a past performance volume as you're going after a piece of work. You have your technical write-up to say, hey, my approach and methodology is what you need. It's the best thing since sliced bread. But then you also have to have your customer references, and that's what they use. They fall back on the CPARs because it's formal, and they rate you from like anything from like outstanding or excellent down to like unsatisfactory. And so you want to always be satisfactory or above.
It's really just like when I'm doing online shopping and I'm trying to buy a product and I can go and look at the reviews, but they have a formal process for it. I think one of the missing pieces of this for companies that are trying to grow is they've only been a subcontractor, not a prime. And so they don't really have that. So I wondered if you could just kind of talk briefly about that.
So I'm actually working on a bid right now where we have one of our teammates is using one of their contracts that they were a sub for. They were a sub on the work. And we need a government person to fill out a past performance questionnaire. It's another document. And they're going directly to the government because the government, per the requirement, has to submit it. And they have a good enough relationship with that customer that they are able to go directly to them, and they're just CCing the prime. And now, because primes can actually do CPARs, and they can fill out evaluations. And I've done it as a prime. I've filled out evaluations for very small companies who are going after vehicles and trying to get their GSA schedules, and they need their prime or their customer to fill out something. And so as a prime contractors can fill those out, but they can't do formal CPARs. So you really kind of have to use the past performance questionnaire and whatever is unique to that individual proposal or request for proposal to get your customer to fill out something for you so that you can become a prime and then you can get an actual CPARs. So it is a little bit of a chicken or egg thing, but there's ways, as long as you have that a relationship or a point of contact within the government who could help you out, they usually can fill out something for you.
Well, that's great news, because I think it's one of the top challenges. So you've got several more points. What's the next thing you wanted to talk about, Michael?
The only thing I wanted to say on that first one, which is probably the most in-depth one, is in COVID times, don't forget what Abraham Lincoln was very famous for, which was writing a letter, sitting on it, coming back the next day, and editing it, because usually it was emotionally driven when he first wrote it. If you're interacting with a customer, understand that they're at home and they're dealing with a clash between family life and home life and work life, and they're overwhelmed as well. So it's very important to stay succinct. It's very important to stay passionate. And it's very important to have that bedside manner, even when you're talking via electrons and you're typing. Go back and revise it to make sure that you're in an active voice, that you're being succinct, and that you don't sound like you're asking for something like a handout or you're begging for something. Treat them with the utmost sort of respect that they deserve, because they're reading stuff and you don't want them to misinterpret it. So it's even more important over email.
Well, I think that's a really great point, because Emily and I were talking the other day about how we sometimes forget to say hello before we launch into what we want. And, it's like, it does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
What's your next thing you wanted to talk about?
So this is a pretty short one, and it's really, it's probably is self-evident, but it's asking good questions, and it's all really important to prepare for phone calls and meetings, whether it's in person, via Zoom, or just via the phone. Write down your list of questions, analyze those, play them out a little bit, because they should evolve over time. And so you come to the final question that you want to ask. And again, you want to make them punchy, worthwhile, and not really beat around the bush, and ask direct, poignant questions, because customers' time is really important. And so whether they're giving you a 15-minute in-call or a 30-minute block of time via Zoom, understand that there's just other things at play, and you're just one portion of their time. So the most succinct and the best questions you can ask, the better that engagement's going to go. And it may sound like goes without saying, but people go into meetings unprepared all the time, and it's very easy to tell who are and are not, who are prepared and are not prepared.
That is a great point, because there's some days that I talk to people and I just say, it sounds like you were just dialing it in that day, not putting your full best face, your best thoughts forward. And I feel like the days we learn the most is when somebody asks us a question, it's like, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yep. And so the third point, I think we're right on time here. The third point is, and I can give you, I could talk to them blue in the face about success stories of this after I failed a few times. Again, I don't look at it like I'm in a realm to sell anything. I'm trying to offer solutions. I'm trying to be on a journey with a customer. And so in that regard, the best thing I ever learned as an Intel officer is I am never the main effort. And as a contractor and as a consultant, we are not the main effort. We are providing a service to somebody. And so with that mindset, going in, you should never say, it's almost like a therapy session too. You don't want to ever put blame on somebody else. You want to say, in my experience, this has been successful. I recommend you think about doing something like this, or I recommend, and use a third, like a pronoun or a third person, reference to say, I recommend the organization think about this, or I recommend you pitch to your boss, or I recommend your boss consider doing X. Because that way it becomes almost their idea to some degree, but it also shows that you're not trying to sell anything. And then when push comes to shove, they're going to pick up the phone and call you when they really have a problem, and you're going to be there to talk to them. And then the exponential sort of return on investment for that goes a long way. And that's how we've went from 10 small contracts to 4 or 5 large contracts, where the revenue completely exceeds, on the lesser amount of contracts than the big ones, right? It's definitely lower margin but higher value, and that's lower size but higher value and higher margin on a lower level of effort, because we become a trusted agent in a few specific places within our OSD customer set, where they really trust us to make sure that we're being good stewards of their money, and not selling them a solution for a problem that they think they have, or we're telling them they have, right? We're selling them potential solutions, and we're going to work with them to pick the right one based on the problem they've said they've had, or they say they have.
Well, that's so important. What you're talking about is developing a long-term relationship with that customer, realizing that it might be 2 million right now, but it could be 200 million in your next interaction with them. And it's so important that they feel like they're being taken care of. One of the other big things that I talk to small business about all the time, and I don't have the answer, so I'm going to ask you, is when a small business gets to the size where they say, we want a prime, they've got a GSA schedule, maybe they're on Navy Seaport E. And I said, well, what are you doing to look for new opportunities? Well, we watch for stuff to come in. What's the real way to do that? Is there a better way?
A lot of folks will spend the money on an outside consultant to help with like building a pipeline and down selecting, and that's really effective if you have the ability to do that. The other thing is to This is where thinking strategically and top down, I think, comes into play, because you can start to cascade down. I mean, and again, as an Intel officer, you start with a very broad question and you get down to a very specific need, and then you go find the information that's associated with that need rather than boiling the ocean. So think big, figure out what's important to you, and then you can develop that pipeline off that. And then from there, you can then qualify that smaller pool. People try to qualify leads by boiling the ocean, and then you get lost in the noise, and you get paralysis. You go down rabbit holes that you don't need to. So think big, funnel it down based on the type of work you want to do, where you think you want to go. Do a market analysis on, is there enough work for me to go into that? And once you clear that answer, then you can start to build that pipeline and then qualify that pipeline. And you'll be surprised that I think that there's plenty of revenue and opportunities to pursue by doing that. And you won't get too focused and you won't miss things, because you have to be comfortable saying no, which is another thing I was taught by my bosses, is you've got to be comfortable saying no as much as you are saying, yes, I can do this, right? Be realistic about it.
Well, I think that's such an important point, to narrow it down to what you want to work on. And when I've talked to people that say, well, I want to do IT, that's not narrow enough.
Yeah.
And lacking other advice, what I've suggested is to take a look at the contracts they've got with the customers they have, the relationships they have, and then go back and talk to those customers or the small business representatives of those customers. And this would be for companies that yet haven't primed very much or at all. What do you think of that? Is that useful at all to go back to where you got domain knowledge?
Yeah, it is, because you have some interior lines there. You have established presence, and so from there, it's about finding who the contracting office is, and then leverage the small business office. That's the other thing to do. Is if you're a small business, whether you're an 8A, some other small disadvantaged business, or you're an SDV OSB, or you just got something, and you want to go and talk to a small business office. Those small business office representatives, and the one that we collectively work with is Chris Harrington at SOCOM. He's the best, because he's your conduit to all the PEOs. And so he can tell you things to look at, and then you can even, he's one of your consultants, right? He's one of the ones to help you filter your pipeline. And we use Washington headquarters services in DC. The Air Force has Air Force District Washington. DIA has its own contracting shop, and they have a small business office. So every single contracting shop has a small business office, and they are there to enable you. And so if you have presence in a specific place, grow there. Make that your center of gravity. For us, the OSD became our center of gravity because we continually bankrolled our 8A work into more 8A work because we were performing well enough, and it's now become a very important piece of portfolio for us to defend because we have such a big presence. And then we can expand out from there, right? Whether it's to the fourth estate, whether it's to a COCOM, and to even heed my own advice, we necked it down to SOCOM because they spend a lot of money and they operate very much like OSD, right? They have an acquisition shop, they have a research shop, because they're a service and a command at the same time. So I'm not going to spend my time going out to Hawaii, even though I'd like to, 10 times a year, because I'm not there. I don't have a presence, and our business model won't, transition well. But between OSD and SOCOM, absolutely, because they do a lot of similar things to OSD. So that's sort of how we look at it.
Well, Chris, that's great advice. And your name's not Chris, so I've already goofed up. Michael Rauseo, we really appreciate your being on today, talking to us about what we've got, how we're trying to help small businesses grow. You've given us some great insight today. If people want to reach out to you and connect, what is your contact information? What's the best way to reach you?
LinkedIn. I have an open profile on LinkedIn, so if you want to touch base that way. The other is, if you can see me on Zoom here, my email domain is michael.rauseo, and then it's at Red Horse Corp. So Red Horse together, and then corp.com.
Okay. Well, and I think what we did is I embedded Chris Harrington's name in my brain. That's right. So everybody talks about how great he is and what a great resource, and he's always supported what we've done with our GovCon Summit as well. So, hey, everybody, thanks so much for being on with us today, and we'll see you next week for Freedom Friday.